what direction are you going in? Because it has nothing to do with dad. Like dad is a nobody. Dad's a deadbeat. Dad left him a long time ago. He doesn't get to show up now and be like, oh, now that my son's made 12 movies, it's time for me to make my debut. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Man, just stressed to high hell. How about that?
Yeah, dude, you got a lot of stuff coming up, right? Like tomorrow
or
or
Sunday.
the next day, Sunday.
Sunday is when it sort of kicks off. We start filming on Monday, 2 days right away, and then a couple of days off, and then 3 days, and then 3 weeks off, and then 2 days, and then 3 weeks off, and then 5 days, and then a couple more weeks off, and then like a day for that bonus scene that we're gonna do. We kicked something out. We kicked it out to July, so it was a little bit easier to manage.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, I would be stressed right now. That's a lot of fun though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's just a lot of stress. There's a lot of moving pieces that, it's like herding cats, you know what I mean? Like you're trying to get everything lined up all at once. There's people, there's locations, there's resources, there's picture vehicles, there's getting the permits on time, dealing with SAG, dealing with Jesus Christ, I mean, just like everything under the sun, and then like personal issues and other things that are going on, and like life issues, and trying to balance it all at once when you're trying to get this whole thing together, plus running the campaign, running the bath bomb campaign at the same time, doing post-production on Dylan's New Nightmare.
Doing what?
Post-production on Dylan's New Nightmare.
Oh, okay.
And then what else? Still working on Ghost in the Fog animated stuff, which is like, sort of in the ether right now. And so it's just like managing all these different things and trying to put it all together and like all this stuff. So it's pretty nuts.
Yeah, that must be tough working on multiple projects at once and especially in different stages of the creative process,
Yeah, I mean, each one is different because I play a different role on each of those projects. So it's just sort of like answering to those roles. Never Hike Alone, I'm the most, hands-on. It's the thing that I'm, heading up. I'm the director, I'm the producer, I'm the writer, and Jason in it and all those things. So like there's a lot that goes into that. And there's a lot of people to manage. We have a large team. We have like 25 to 30 people on set that we work with, and that's just our crew. And then there's, actors, which we can range anywhere from like 2 to 10 on a certain day. There's travel, there's all that stuff. So luckily I have 2 producers that I work with, Brittany Montero and Kyle Klein. And so we just kind of spread out our duties. Everybody takes, a piece of it. And, I take a lot of like the sort of like the preliminary, like UPM AD roles where I'm doing the schedule and I'm doing the call sheets and I'm getting those things kind of ready, because it also helps me as a director kind of figure out how I want to shoot my days. And it gets me really in touch with all the nitty gritty of everything that's got to be on set that day, and remembering like, okay, I want to do this scene and I have this specific shot, so I need to make sure that I have this thing. So I'm going to put it in the notes, and I know what I need to specifically show. So I have that sort of insight versus typically there's a first AD and a director, and the first AD is doing their best to sort of build the call sheet and all the things that need, or not the first AD, usually it's the second AD. But anyway, to build all those things and sort of run it by the director. So there is no back and forth. I'm just having conversations with myself. It's like, what am I missing? What am I thinking about? Is there anything else I need? Is there something that like a specific department should know for a scene so they can anticipate? So, a lot of the work that I do when I'm not directing is actually working on set in the production department under the first AD. I do a lot of like production assistant, second AD for like smaller shows and things like that. And I first AD a lot of independent films. In fact, I got 2 first AD gigs that I'm doing for friends right after I'm done with Never Hike Alone stuff. Like I do the first one, and my friend's doing a short over a weekend. It's like 2 days. I'm gonna first AD that. And then another friend of mine's got another short in June. And so I'm gonna go help her with that. And that's another 2 or 3 days where I'm first ADing and helping run the set. So that type of work really helps me with when I'm on set, being focused as a director, knowing that like time is essential. Anticipation is essential. How can I get all of the shots that I want in a feasible amount of time and give each shot enough time to look good? And so that all comes down to the prep. That comes down to how much time and effort we put into getting ready prior to, rather than showing up to set and being like, okay, so how are we going to shoot this? And you're wasting all this time sort of like standing around. And, honestly, that's probably why you see a lot of, like, one of the things that independent filmmakers struggle with, or first time directors and things like that. You'll notice that, like, those films have a certain look. They don't look very cinematic. They don't cut very cinematic. The shots don't, like, it's just a lot of wide shots with people standing in frame and sort of like maybe jumping back between a couple of shots and not thinking about, like, ooh, how can I build momentum, or how can I be in the right moment at the right time, and not just cover it in one shot, but maybe there's 3 shots that cover a single action. But each version of that shot covers a different piece of that, or a different piece of dialogue, and something to cut to that's a variety, so you're not so cutting back and forth. So you set that up in your pre-plan to say, like, hey, we're going to get up in this angle. When I'm in this angle, that means I'm doing 2 more sizes of lenses, because I'm going to go tighter for this one line, because I need to really see the actor's face in this moment. Like, and a lot of people think about that after the fact. They think, like, oh, I captured the person saying the line, so I got it. And it's not just pointing a camera at somebody and saying lines. It's, using the camera as a storytelling device to get people on this imaginary roller coaster ride that is a film.
How long did it take you to learn that, though? That's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing like a version of all of this for like 15 years. It started way back when I was in feature animation. I worked as a production coordinator and was in charge of both story and editorial, and was an assistant to the director. So I was on 3 different films at the forefront of a film going from a concept, a simple premise, to it getting built out into a full script that was then handed off to storyboards, and then working with storyboard artists to basically map out the scenes for animated films. And so all of that camera work transfers over into animation, because it's still in a 3D space. You're still using a lot of the same techniques. The storytelling devices are the same. The reality is stretched. So you actually think a little bit more outside the box, because you can do a few more crazy things in certain situations. So making the adjustment back to live action when I did about like 8 years of animation actually helped me, because everything that I had learned was written in visual. I hadn't yet gone and done things with a camera on set. I hadn't done those things. So I had an idea of how to visually tell a story, what shots are meant to be where, what shots are helpful in certain situations, different types of camera moves and things like that. And then the learning curve getting to set was, how do you get a live action camera to do these things, where in animation, there is no physical ground in which we can stick a camera in the wall if we want. Like, we don't have to like worry about physics. Like, we remove the wall, we stick a camera there, and we have it do something, because that's where we need the camera to be. And so in live action, by trial and error, and a lot of that was during the sort of like the pre-production of Never Hike Alone, was going up and testing a lot of this stuff and trying to figure out how to get, working with different types of dollies and, little like jibs, and, even just a handheld versus, being on a gimbal, and what the types of looks do and the way that it makes the camera feel, what type of lens makes you feel like you're in a certain mood, or what's the best way to cover a certain scene. There was just a lot of like playing around. And so it was probably by the time I got done with Never Hike Alone that the communication for how to get what I wanted had gone from like going to set and maybe getting like 75% of what I wanted, or 65% of what I wanted, and maybe having to reshoot some stuff, towards the end being to like 90 to 99th percentile of like every shot we did was exactly the way I lined it up in my head, and exactly the way that we practiced it. And so things were a little bit more efficient. And like I said, that all comes down to what I learned for economic storytelling back in animation, because that was not, so working with a storyboard artist, that was very much a raw feed of the options of camera angles that you could use, and ideas that you can use, and ways you can cover moments through a storyboard artist's eyes. But then when that goes to editorial, it's their job to even trim that down even further and make it more economical, and make sure that we're only using shots that tell the story and move the story forward, versus shoe leather, as we call it. That sort of doesn't get you anywhere. It's just, you're spinning your wheels in this scene and you don't know why you're in this moment. It doesn't help add like the joke's not funny enough, or the moment's not like important enough. And so you learn to lose those moments. And so the earlier in the process you can whittle that down, that means that what you're focusing on set is your absolute essential. And then when that goes to our editorial, or an editor, say for this, for Mike, like Mike Appy for Never Hike Alone 2, he's got like, I remember when we came back from shooting the teaser last year for Never Hike Alone 2, and I came back with the footage and I was like, I hope I got enough. And he came back, he's like, dude, he's like, you got more than enough. Like I have so much to work with. He's like the the task for Mike, and that's my goal, is the task for him is like, he's really going to make hard choices of what he's going to select, because almost every setup we do could in a certain way be what we need for that shot. But I also come into that. I mean, I started in editorial as like a filmmaker. Like in college, that was the first course I took that really kind of like amped me up for film, because I had always been, up until that point, filming with my like DVR camera,
Right.
and editing in tape, like, oh, that take sucked, let me rewind and like redo the take, and there you go. And like, it's cut in camera, we're cutting it on 2 VHS tapes. So to be able to drop something in digitally and slide things around and cut right on the right moment, and not have like a little like camera futz because you got the tape going and there's like a little in between the cut and stuff like that. So I was really like, oh my God, this is what I've always wanted to do, be able to just piece things together. And so that's always been like a really big strength of mine, even from the beginning. So I usually have a pretty clear vision in my head of how a scene, like how we're going to cover it, but also it's all based on how the scene looks in my head when I watch it as I'm writing. And so when I'm writing it, like I'm writing out basically shot by shot what's going on, and describing like, in this shot, this is what's happening. And then like, we're going over here and this character does this. And that's the first part of the process, is writing it and kind of writing it out to make sure that all the action is covered. And then there's something called script coverage and script analysis, where I take off my writing hat and I put on my directing hat, and I sit there and I don't retype dialogue. I don't work in Final Draft. I literally have like, where is it? Is it somewhere around here? Oh, I took it with me. Anyway, I have like my script, and I make all handwritten notes, and I circle things, and I say, this is going to be a close-up. Okay, maybe I can get here a little bit more efficient. Maybe there's a better way to, like, okay, I got to think about like, what's the blocking here? What's the scene? And then, we do a lot of like location scouting. So you go to a location scout with a script in your hand, and you realize that like, oh, the bed's actually on this side of the room. So I gotta be here, 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 and oh, the window is over there. So that means the light's coming. And so that's the other thing to think about, is like lighting. Like,
Yeah.
if the light's coming this way. And so there's just like, but what the nice thing is like, when you sort of do this long enough and you build a team after enough time, that's when you have your department heads that are the people that you turn to, and you say, hey, I'm running into trouble here. Like, I want to do this, but how can we achieve this in this type of setup? And anytime I get stuck, they can bail me out. But I've also done enough research on my own that when we step into set, that they're set up to succeed. And that's my job as a director, is to have a vision, to set my team up for success, and not have a plan in place that's not achievable. And on the sets that I've been on that things haven't turned out how people really want, it's usually there's a disconnect between the reality of what you can actually shoot and actually achieve versus like what was in my head. Like, oh, I always saw it this way. You know what I mean? Like, it has to be this way. It's in my head. And it's like, I'm sorry, but circumstances have shown up that when we show up on set, that's not possible. So you have to achieve what you want. What's the important part of the story that you want to tell here? And I can help them sort of be like, okay, if that's the important part, you want to focus on this. So if we want to focus on this and we have these elements, where's the best place to put the camera? Don't think about the shot you came up with that you really love. Think about what you can actually do. And then we'll make that look good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the audience doesn't know that wasn't your first choice.
Yeah.
Right.
And the audience really isn't going to know. And even if it was something that would have been great and all that stuff, you start to learn, you're like, okay, if I want some type of fantastic shot that has all these moves and does all these things, next time you got to plan a little bit better. You got to be a little bit more further ahead. You can't just show up on set and be like, okay, we're doing a oneer, and it's going to be a 10-minute oneer. We're going to run around and do all this stuff. You start to realize that like there's just technical aspects that you have to be ready for, versus like, oh, I'm the director, so anything I say goes, which I think is a big misconception by people when they think about the director, that like the director steps on set and they're all powerful and whatever they want they get. The director gets nothing but pushback from its crew all day,
Right.
because the things they ask from them are sometimes unachievable, or they didn't put that in the budget to have the right equipment, or it's just that, it's sort of the way it goes sometimes.
Man, first of all, just want to say all of that was awesome.
Yeah, that was incredible. You just
I just want to say I'm like a huge fan of learning like the technical aspect of how films are made and stuff. And we've talked to a few other filmmakers and directors and writers and stuff. And that was all well put. And I have I think I've said this the last like 3 episodes we've done. I think there's a certain creativity that comes when, like what you were talking about with, having something written down and how you wanted the shot to go. And then when you get on set, it's not necessarily that way, whether, like the bed's over there, it's a different angle, whatever. But I think there is a certain sense of creativity that like comes from that, where you have to kind of manipulate what you wanted to do, and maybe it comes out even better.
Yeah, a lot of the times, like, necessity is like, what is it? Necessity is the what of invention. It's like, it sort of pushes you to sort of like, and I got to say that like when you have physical objects in front of you, in my opinion, it gets easier. Like you have nothing to argue against, and you have toys to play with, and you're in your sandbox. And when I have the toys to play with, that's when I'm at my best. And when I don't have the necessary toys to play with, I sort of live in this world of like what can I really do here? I'm sort of like, everything's an option right now. So like, it's like going to a restaurant with like 5,000 things on the menu. You can eat anything that you want, but what do you really feel like eating right now? Versus like, no, I'm at a Chinese restaurant, and there are certain things that I like in this Chinese restaurant and for food. And so I'm going to order those things for food because those are the things I like. And it just narrows down my choice, and you go forward. And if you show up at a Chinese restaurant, but you were planning on eating Italian, then, you might be able to order noodles.
might be in the wrong spot.
But you might be in the wrong spot, and you're going to have a bad time because you didn't adapt to your surroundings. And and filmmaking is adapting. It's nothing is ever going to go perfect. You're racing against time. And so the more you fight against the grain of what is actually in front of you, the more time you waste, instead of just being able to sort of on the fly adjust your plan. But that's for when there's things that like you can't do. But like, for example, on Monday we're going to shoot our exterior hospital scenes. So we have 2 nights of filming. I went up there a month ago with my DP, and we walked through every single shot that was in my head. And when I had originally written the scene, or when I originally written all the scenes that were up there, in my head, the way I had it laid out, I had characters entering and exiting a completely different wing of the hospital, having conversations at a completely different part of the parking lot, and the way that they were going to come in and where they were going to be and how they were going to meet each other. And then going back up there and seeing it through a lens, realizing that, we could utilize this other entrance. It actually looks a lot better. It sets us up for all these scenes. All of these scenes can take there. Logistically, we're out of the way of the hospital. Like, we're over by the emergency exit, but like, it's a mountain hospital where like barely anything happens. So like, we're going to be sort of off to our own devices to kind of work and have exactly what we want. And those are the photos that we've been releasing of the hospital, is that wing. That's not originally where I was going to shoot it, and not how I originally wrote the scene. But when I look at the scene, I say, this is a moment that needs to happen. Where that moment happens in space can happen anywhere. It's just about what's going to be the most efficient and cinematic way to do it. And so even though for a year I had in my head that it was going to happen in the middle of the parking lot, we were going to build like a bulletin board, and it was going to be on stands, and we're going to have it there, and they were going to meet this certain way, that all of a sudden it was like, but wait, if we do it over there, we don't need that thing. And there's actually a better footpath, and the characters are closer together, and there's less, shoe leather, less walking, less things like that. And even though I had sort of planned it that way, I was able to undo that plan really quick and be like, I'm still getting everything I want, and I'm getting it in a better place. So, because we go and do, and that's like a big part of how we prep for Never Hike Alone and how I shoot, is that I really don't like to go to set unless I've been there 1 or 2 or 3 times. where I've walked through the set, I've taken in the set, I can sit at home and I can remember, you know, through the photos that we take, and I sort of like will use my phone and I'll be like, okay, like there's no one in the bed, but I'm just, okay, there's a picture of that, there's a picture of that, and we cut around here, I'll probably have the character doing this. Like I literally was doing, I was dog sitting a couple weeks ago, and the dog that I babysit has like a ton of like little toys that are like little they're little like squirrels and stuff, and I was literally just doing previs with them.
Oh, hell yeah.
That's funny.
I'm like, how, you know, and thinking about like, because I'm thinking about like, what's the adjustment on the camera movement? Where does the camera line go? And I know that like my characters are going to be here, and I know the layout is here. So as I was shot listing and locking down my shot list, it's based on physical location versus, like I said, like showing up to a set on day one and never walking through it is probably the worst thing you can do to yourself, because you're going to be trying to figure out as you go versus having a whole plan laid out based specifically on that place. And then as you go and all of a sudden something doesn't work out, you're not trying to do this for every single shot. It's just one or two that might be a little different. It might, you know, be like, oh, that, but because we've established our other shots, you have to stay within a certain technical sort of physical line where the camera's got to be. So there's only so many places you can be. And it sort of just forces you into be like, oh, I wanted to do this, but you know what? Scrap doing it that way. We'll just, maybe I pick it up in this shot. And like a lot of it too is sometimes it's like, I got, you know, have like 2 or 3 shots where you're like, okay, we're going to get coverage of this person, coverage of this person, and coverage of this person. And then you sit there with the camera and go like, you know what? Like, because the movement kind of flows to different characters, it can start here and then move up and reveal the character and then swing to the other character for the other part of the line. And as that happens, the camera starts to drift and catches the other character as they enter into the scene. And now all of a sudden, what started as an insert has now turned into the over the shoulder, which will become your master shot for that character for the rest of the scene. And so instead of doing 3 shots and 3 setups and having to retake every single time, you've combined 3 shots. And that's sort of something that like they always credit like Spielberg for doing really, really well. And they use the shot that I remember in class that we studied was a shot in Jaws. It starts as, I think it's the kids on the swings, or no, it's just a wide shot of the house. Brody leaves the house. The camera dollies it. It goes from a wide shot to a profile tracking, and then it turns into a close up, and then him leaving. And it's all one shot, and it has like 5 different setups in it. And so instead of jumping around and cutting and getting all that, the scene never jumps. It just sort of naturally takes you through the moment and gets you to where you need to be, and does everything in one fluent motion, and it all looks cinematic. In fact, I was at I went to City Walk in Universal last night for a screening of The Big Lebowski for 420, and
Oh, wow.
And seeing that on a big screen for the first time, I think ever. I mean, I think I've only seen it on, you know, VHS and DVD and stuff like that. But being able to sit down and watch Roger Deakins on the big screen in a time when you think about it, they were shooting on film, and a lot of the stuff they were like, I was like, wow, I remember it being sort of a technical shot movie, but there's a lot of technical crazy shots in this. It's like, how did they achieve that? But like, as a kid, I would have never been able to tell you how they achieve it. But last night I was sitting there being able to say like, oh, I know how they did this. Like, I know that how they would have, oh, wow. And like things that seem fantastical are actually super simple, and things that seem super simple are actually really fantastical. So I had just a new appreciation for it. It gave me an idea on how to fix a shot in my shot list where I sort of had, you know, the wrong motion on the camera going. I won't spoil it, but I had a shot where like the camera was dollying backwards in a scene where like all this stuff was going on. And I realized actually I should start back and push in, because I want to land on this moment that I was going to cover in its own shot later on. But actually, if I combine all of this stuff, it actually becomes a way more interesting shot, because it ends with this very pivotal moment that turns into one of the more stylistic kills of the film. And so it makes it, again, it's an experiential shot. It's one of those things that it starts off as one thing, and then by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, like,
Fuck
oh,
yeah.
and it goes into that next level. And then all of a sudden it becomes like, I don't know, to me, there's like a music video quality to this sort of kill, because it's so like, it's so out in the open, and there's a lot going on in the moment, and there's a lot of like lighting shit going on in that moment. And there's like the way it's sort of like shot and stylized. It's something that like we really haven't done in Never Hike Alone yet. And that's sort of one of my favorite things about this new movie is that we really get to crank the dial on our kill sequences. I mean, we did some fun stuff in Never Hike in the Snow. And the sort of the idea is that with the money that we've raised, we raised good money for Never Hike in the Snow, and that went towards doing 2 really big kills. And now we've raised like 3 times that amount. And so now there are lots of kills in the movie, but a lot of them are at that level. Every time we go into a kill sequence, for the most part, there's some type of fantastical type of kill that is going to impress people.
Cool.
And the ones that aren't at that level do something else in the standpoint of that they're not like super gory, or they're not like super on camera, or it might like something happens to somebody and we cut away, that there's something else going on that is also just as entertaining. So we really sort of like, when it's time to do a big kill, the big kills show up and they are fucking huge. And then when there's a little bit more like haste and things are kind of happening more in the moment, the kills are still brutal, but like we go on that ride with the camera, and the camera is the thing that takes us on this journey of experiencing these moments with the characters and putting them in the best light. So, with everything going on, it's like you can plan. So now that we're starting this on Monday and we get to shoot, it's going to be nice because, like with like the sneak preview last year, the opening of the movie, essentially, obviously I had that. We actually storyboarded that. Actually, a good friend of mine, JD, storyboarded that. And JD Leslie is the storyboard artist. And so we had an idea of like what it was going to look like anyway. But when we actually got out there and we physically had to do it, and we physically went through the scenes, like, for example, there's a shot of Tom and young Stevie on the dock, and you'll notice that like the camera's drifting out and sort of coming out from behind the trees, and it's like a really nice profile shot. It shows the entire lake. Well, when you draw that in storyboards, like very simple to like just float the camera over the water, but we had a boat on our set that was there. So we put the camera in the boat and we used a boat like a dolly, and we had a rope that was connected to the boat. And when it was time to do the shot, we pushed the boat out at a certain speed and we had it on a rope. And when it got to a certain point, we grabbed it and started pulling it back to reverse the dolly, and used the same techniques that we would use with equipment, using found stuff. Like there's a lot of shots in that film or in that moment that are shot from a rowboat. And so it even gives it that sort of like on the water feel too. So there's like natural things that you can use and make use of that really that can take a scene and make it just that a little bit more cinematic.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Holy shit, that's cool.
That scene
is super cool too.
This is crazy information. I mean, you're just like right off the bat, man. It's just gung ho. I gotta listen. So I've got a few questions for you, just because I know we'll pick up on it at some point, but I'll end up forgetting. We've got. I know you've got a couple of them, correct? Of Never Hike Alone. They're all. Is there like 6 of them that you wrote them, or? Because I remember seeing the poster art for it.
Yeah. So the way it went is that there were, how do I have it broken up? Yeah, basically there's 6 chapters in total, I guess you could say. In fact, there's even now a 7th that we may or may not make. It just sort of depends on something. I think if anything, I might go the graphic novel route with it, just because it's so, there's just a lot. It would take a lot to make this movie, but it's like something I'm really passionate about. But it was basically 6 chapters. And originally in 2020, after I'd made, I made Never Hike Alone in 2017. I went out to studios after that and was pitching Friday the 13th as like, I wanted to take Never Hike Alone to streaming. I wanted to be like, let me tell like a series of stories with this sort of concept in mind, not always about the same characters, and do all this stuff. And so I started pitching, and I had some ideas about like, there would be maybe 6 to 8 episodes every Halloween that would be made by 6 to 8 different directors, all with a different spin on Friday the 13th, all with their different story. Like if they wanted to do a film about Pamela, or they wanted to do a film about Roy, or they wanted to do a film about, Deadite Jason or SpaceX Jason, or like, any of that stuff, they could pick that and go. And I was like, And what I pitched was like, I would just like to keep the Never Hike Alone series going, and each season will come up with a new entry to it. And so I sort of hung on to that first, and I was pitching, and then the lawsuit came along and all that stuff. And I had pitched to Warner Brothers. I got through like 2 different meetings, and they were really well, and they wanted to set me up on a meeting with HBO. And then that's when the second round of the lawsuit went through. Like, we were having meetings because everyone thought the lawsuit was going to be over, and we were trying to get ahead of the curve. And so I really wasn't like approaching crowdfunding at that point to be like, oh, I'm going to make all these crazy movies. I'm going to do Jason in the Snow. I'm going to do a follow-up to Never Hike Alone and all this stuff. And it was sort of like, I kind of had faith that we'd get into the studio system, and then that all fell through. And I went like, okay, I got to fall back on crowdfunding. But I ended up, I was in a conundrum, because the projects that I had written out were multi-million-dollar films. They're multi-million-dollar projects, and it would take so much to make them, so many resources and all of those things. And up until that point, the most money that like anyone had raised for a fan film was $50,000, and that was us selling our home video campaign. And that home video campaign was essentially what paid for Never Hike Alone, because most of Never Hike Alone came out of my pocket. You know, we raised about 19 grand, and we raised some like side money and side cash like that. But that money burns quick when you're on set and you're working with professionals. Like, that money gets eaten up and it goes. And then we had to do the crowdfund stuff. And I was just paying out of pocket for most of the shipping and a lot of the stuff that we were making, the Blu-rays and all those things. So when I was able to recoup with the home video campaign, I kind of saw this like, okay, my cap is 50 grand. And at the time, when I was doing my research on fan films, $50,000 was about as much as I had researched that studios wanted you to raise. If you went over $50,000, they were going to come after you and sue you. Like, it was all like, I was a pirate at that point. Like, I didn't know what was going to get me in trouble. I was just doing what I could to make the projects as good as I could. And then I said, okay, so what I'll do is I'll take this movie that I have, and it's got 4 chapters in it. And it has a snow chapter, and then it continues Never Hike Alone. Picks up with Never Hike Alone, continues Never Hike Alone, brings it back to the hospital, and then, has the big finale episode. And then, so going into that, I knew that I had to sort of come up with some type of sizzle piece that would get people kind of behind it. I mean, I made Never Hike Alone, but we were sort of bored and wanted to do something. And my friend Trevor had written that song Disappear. And I had listened to it, and it just reminded me of Jason. And I had met an effects artist named Nora Hewitt working on 13 Fanboy. And so I had pictured this idea for a music video. I acted the whole thing out on this back porch for her one night. And she was just like, whatever you need me, I'm in. And so we went out, we shot it in Flagstaff, and that became sort of our sizzle piece to be like, we want to extend the story of Never Hike Alone, but we want to tell the story in 2 different directions. We want to tell the story of like, where has Jason been all these years? Like, if it's been 20 years since in our world, Jason Takes Manhattan, because I can't logically jump off of Jason Goes to Hell or Freddy versus Jason or Jason X. It just hasn't happened yet. I just wanted to continue the story where it left off in Paramount, because I feel like there's a lot of fans out there that were just like, we don't like, okay, there's New Line Films, that's fine, but I could do without them. I would have been happy with a sequel to Manhattan. And so I wrote it from that perspective. And I used that as sort of this moment in 2001 that sort of happened and sort of showed a shift in Jason's mood. This angry creature that's been roaming the earth and murdering people and doing all these things is starting to figure out that after all this time, murdering people isn't getting him any closer to any sort of resolution or fulfillment of this death curse that he's chasing and that he's enacting on different people. It's like, what is it really getting him? You know what I mean? He's still alone in this camp with no one to talk to, and not realizing that deep within that body that he's in, that he's got the mind of like a 12-year-old boy. And so it was sort of like this sort of, and if you listen to the lyrics of Disappear, it's like, there's this sense that like, he just wishes that he could rest and just lay down and like, let his bones turn to dust and like, just go move on. Cause he doesn't want to do this anymore, but this is his job. He's sort of like death in a way, you know what I mean? Like eternally bound to go capture the souls of the living that pass on to the afterlife. Like it's his job to do this. And he necessarily doesn't want to do the job anymore. So his modus operandi sort of changes. It goes less from, I need to hunt down people and make them pay, versus I need to keep people out of here. And I need to make sure that they don't disturb my peace so I can create this little oasis that like whatever I have, it's just me and mom and we don't be disturbed. And that's that's based on a lot of what Never Hike Alone was based on, is the fact that Kyle MacLeod isn't a typical Friday the 13th character. He's not out there smoking dope. He's not having sex in the woods. He's not doing anything. He's an innocent dude walking through the forest who stumbles into the camp. Jason keeps an eye on him. And it isn't until he crosses into Jason's actual territory, that attic place, where he goes, shit, I have to act. And Never Hike in the Snow is the same thing. It isn't until Mark Hill takes a photo of Jason and Jason has no choice but to act. He's forced into acting versus, necessarily like waiting to kill somebody. So Disappear became our sizzle piece. Never Hike in the Snow was the first one up. It was a prequel to Never Hike Alone. It was a way for me to take Jason from, put Jason in the snow, because that was something that fans always wanted to see. So I said, okay, put Jason in the snow. Come up with a little concept, and we come up with some stuff. We did some like photography to help sell it. And we took it to crowdfunding, and that crowdfund made $75,000.
Wow.
And we were like, whoa, like that was way more than I thought I was going to make. Like, holy crap. And so what was basically like a 15 to 20 minute short film, I was able to extend into 25 minutes. I believe we ended up raising about 120 something at the end of the day.
Wow.
And we were able to, and so at that time I had made my shift from from crowdfunding to live action after Never Hike Alone. So now I had about 2.5 years on set experience working on big films and big TV shows. And so my goal was to shoot as an expensive half-hour pilot episode for a series as I could. And I took the idea of Never Hike Alone 2, and that's when I split it out into those 4 different stories. Never Hike in the Snow, Never Hike Again, Jason Takes Crystal Lake, and The Final Hike, which is basically Never Hike Alone 2 spread out by its acts. And I thought, okay, this is going to be great. I will come out, I'll be able to raise 75 to 100 grand per episode. I'll be able to invest that all into 20 pages or 25 pages of script and execute that at a high level on short-term basis. Like each production is going to be between 5 to 6 days. I'm going to have 25 to 30 people on set. I'm going to be able to hire the proper effects people to come out and do high-level kills, high-level camera work, high-level lighting, and all those fun things. And we could focus on smaller productions, because at the end of the day, trying to do Never Hike Alone 2 would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I didn't necessarily have the confidence that we could raise that at first. And so Never Hike in the Snow came out, or not quite yet. We finished Never Hike in the Snow. Pandemic hits. Yeah. The original plan of having snow cut by spring and releasing it over the summer and launching Never Hike Again on crowdfunding all went up in smoke because we couldn't shoot. My editor's father ended up catching COVID and passing away. So my editor went home to New York for 2 or 3 months to grieve with his family. And I was left in the pandemic by myself in Los Angeles with a bunch of footage that I couldn't cut myself because I didn't have the necessary, the reason why I have this editor is because he's a lot better at it than me. And he's got the proper tools and techniques and all the plugins, and he just knows how to do it faster than I ever could. And I always appreciate an outside perspective on something that I've thought of. But when somebody else comes and brings their spin to it, those two minds start working together and you get something better out of it. So I was patient. I figured we'll wait till, October 13th. It would make sense. Like, we'll just kind of go for that. Maybe maybe COVID will be done by then. You know what I mean? And then obviously it wasn't. We had to do an all online premiere. It wasn't as fun as Never Hike Alone because we didn't get to go to a film festival and like celebrate with people and bring people together. Everybody was watching at home. Most of the people who watched it assumed it was going to be a feature-length film because of the money that we raised. Mm-hmm. And everybody got mad at us. They were like, what is this? 25 minutes? Like, this is garbage. And I'm like, do you have any idea how expensive it is to shoot on the snow? Like, I went from 2 actors who weren't getting paid to like 6 actors who were all getting paid. A crew that was getting paid. Like, Never Hike Alone was cheap because it was me and 3 or 4 other people at a time shooting 75% of that film on weekends and not spending a lot of money. And then we raised 20 grand to shoot like 2 4-day weeks. Like, to shoot all the stunt stuff. And then one night that we did to do that ambulance scene, which is why it feels so rushed at the end. And when you actually spread the cost out of an actual film on a day, like if we were doing it legitly and I was paying everybody their actual rates, these productions would be $400,000-$500,000 a piece. Like
Wow.
easy. Like Never Hike Alone 2 would probably be around $750,000-$900,000 if I was paying everybody their actual rates
Right.
that they would get on a SAG or a union show or a DGA show, like stuff like that. Like everyone's doing me a favor here. Like I'm just making sure they're not losing money on the deal at this point.
Yeah.
You know, they got to still be able to pay their bills. They got to be able to take the time off. And in order to do it correctly, you got to shoot it all at once. So we had to do that. But Never Hike in the Snow gave me the confidence that we could raise more than we could before. And with the pandemic taking 2 years to weed its way out of our system, and for, you know, us to be able to approach a set and be like, okay, well, at least I don't have to get, you know, a COVID coordinator now, or like I do have a COVID coordinator for this, but like it's a volunteer who I worked with on a set on like American Horror Stories. So like we worked together and he's in the COVID department and he came out and said, hey, I'll come volunteer for the show. I'll let you use my name so you can get your COVID clearances and we can go through that. But like to do a production and then add a COVID compliance on top of it, to send everybody to testing every 2 to 3 days and like all this stuff, like that's stuff that only studios can afford. That's not stuff indie studios can do.
Yeah,
so
right.
it really kind of like handcuffed us to have to be patient and wait. You know, last year we raised the money. We raised $150,000 for Never Hike Alone 2, which I'm glad now that we got delayed, because that probably wouldn't have paid for the entire film the way that it's coming out now. And we had run into a bunch of scheduling conflicts because at the beginning of the year, you know, it's all sort of like up in the air. We don't know if we're going to get it. People are sort of making plans. And then like one scheduling thing falls through. And then all of a sudden, after 2 years of being locked in our houses, everyone in my team had like some different type of family trip or thing they needed to be at, or a job they were going to be, because everything opened back up. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, I'm competing with everybody getting out of their house. Right. And so we just kind of sat back and said, you know what, we have a lot to build. We have a lot to do. So we'll move it to next spring. We'll be way ahead of the curve, and it'll give me time to raise more money, and let's hit some of these stretch goals, add more scenes to the film. You know, I had to make Never Hike Alone 2 originally last year. I would have had to cut out like probably 15 to 20% of what's in the script right now, and tell a very much sort of condensed version of it. We still would have got all the beats and all the things would have happened, but now it's sort of like the film has a chance to breathe, and we get a lot more fun out of it. We get more deaths out of it, and not just arbitrary death, although there is some arbitrary death now that we've added this bonus scene, but it's fun and it works, and it kind of adds to the story, and it gives us a break from some of the other stories, and so we're not just stuck in the same moment for 10 minutes at a time and then getting back to the actual film we want to see. So we raised that money, and all of a sudden we have the ability to make everything all at once. So fans have waited 2.5 years. I'm not going to make them wait for individual episodes now. It was just like, hey, Never Hike in the Snow proved that we could raise more money than we thought we could. Everybody's been really patient with us so far. So let's see if we can just go for it. Let's just go for the feature film. And, we planned everything out. We raised about 200, almost 250 right before we were going to start filming this year. Well, when I made Never Hike in the Snow, we were in the middle of a drought in California, and I was lucky to get the snow that I got in Never Hike in the Snow, which there's a little bit, but there's not as much as I wanted. This year in California, we got the opposite of a drought. we got bombarded with snow, and so much so that the state is in a state of emergency. That there was too much snow in the mountains where people were snowed into their homes. Roofs of grocery stores were collapsing, and there's so much extra runoff water and all this stuff that when we went for our permit, they said, you can't apply for a permit because it's all shut down. And so I was supposed to be shooting this week. That was the original plan. We were supposed to shoot all the camp stuff this week. And right now, all the snow is melted. We would have been able to shoot, but everything was shut down. So like about a month ago is when this all happened. We had to change our shooting days from this week to the middle of June. So it became sort of like, again, like you're prepared. We're way ahead of the schedule. We're like, I'm basically like sitting on my hands over the winter being like, well, I got to get out there and we'll get going. And as soon as we're like a few weeks away from filming, that's when we had to go and redo everything that we had been working all winter. Like we had 6 months to get all this stuff ready, and we had to do all that work in a matter of like 2.5 weeks again.
Wow.
And that's calling everybody on the film and saying, hey, okay, so it looks like we can get some dates in between here and here. Oh, you're going on vacation that day? Shit. Like, all right. I mean, literally, we were at a point where like we had 2 different dates that we could go to. And I mean, we're threading the needle. And if we would have ended on the other one, I was going to have to keep one of my lead actors from going to a trip to Germany and send her 2 days late and pay for all of her plane ticket changes. You know what I mean? Just to get her on set for that day to have this moment, because there's no other day that we can shoot it.
Yeah.
And so we had to be prepared for all that. So it's a conversation with like over 40 to 50 people that you're all trying to get in the same place. And it's also, again, the vehicles, the locations, the permits, the insurance, stretching it out and doing these things. And so those things cost more. So good thing we raised all this money, because everything's getting more expensive now. Now, instead of flying people down for a 2-week span, I got to fly them down for this week span, send them back home, and then fly them down again in June. So that's doubling my travel budget. Instead of doing the when we originally did the cars and the way we were going to do it was all going to be up for 2 weeks. So I was going to get all these discounts, and like there's only going to be one trip, because you might pay $425 a day for a cop car to be on your set, but it costs $1,500 to tow it somewhere. Yeah. So now I got to, instead of towing it twice, I'm towing it 4 times, and that's adding another $3,000 to the budget. And so you see how this sort of like just keeps piling up.
Yeah.
And that's why we have contingency. That's why we, do certain things. But at the same time, like we did raise enough money where I was able to go back in and add the meat to scenes. And I realized that one of the things I wanted to do with Never Hike Alone 2, which was for a long time, I was sort of like, I want this to be like, I want the continuity to be so fluent that you've never seen a Friday the 13th list before. Like everything's going to be the same. And the more I went through the project, I was like, why am I going to handcuff myself to something to when I had no money, when we could make it better? And so there are scenes in Never Hike Alone that people in Never Hike Alone 2, they're going to see that they've seen from Never Hike Alone 1, but we're going to redo them sort of like Evil Dead 2.
Right.
Where we're going to do the same exact scene, same exact lines in a new set. Like, I don't know if you guys have been following me on Instagram, but we've been showing like the build of Jason's cabin that's upstairs, like the one from the exact one from Never Hike Alone 1.
Yeah.
Like it's got a different look than it did the first time, but we're building it a lot better. And we're going to refilm some of the scenes that like Kyle did up there to sort of bridge some stuff together. And the ambulance scene is going to be completely redone with new elements and new things that weren't there before, and other things that were happening that weren't there before. But they're going to be close enough to where it's going to feel like Back to the Future 2, when like Marty sees himself in the first movie and those things are happening.
Yeah.
It's sort of like being able to see the same scene from Never Hike Alone 1 from a different perspective.
Oh, wow.
And grow it out and make it better. Like there's 2 actors I couldn't get back for the film because they were doing other things and had committed to other roles and weren't necessarily in a place in their careers where doing a fan film was worth it to them anymore. So 2 of our characters got completely replaced, the 2 EMT characters.
Yeah.
So instead of having Axel and Denny back to the same people, we have 2 new actors as Axel and Denny. But I was able to, through my friends, like hire a good friend of mine to play, Denny, and through another friend of mine, Rakefet, who is playing Nurse Hobbs in the film. She found me Ben, this actor by the name of Ben, who's going to take over the Axel role. So because we did this, I sort of approached Never Hike Alone 2 with the standpoint of like, I'm going to tell it like it's its own story, because it is Never Hike Alone, the events of Never Hike Alone, all from Tommy's perspective. But it also continues where we left off in Never Hike Alone 1. But it also starts before Never Hike Alone 1 ends. Like there's a cross gap of like pre-lap information. Like I said, like Evil Dead 2, like we spend a little bit of time catching you back up to where you were in Never Hike Alone 1 through the eyes of another character. And because everyone's watched Never Hike Alone 1, by the time they meet Kyle, and by the time they sort of like have Kyle like cross paths with Tommy, everybody knows what Kyle's done because they watched the first movie. They know the trouble that he's been in. They know what he's running from. They know what he has, been in trouble for. So it sort of gives this anticipation to the audience that they're a little bit ahead of our characters to be like, oh, that's how we got found. And oh, that's a moment that like, yeah, it could have happened in between this moment and this moment from Never Hike Alone 1. So there's kind of like a cool sort of like, and obviously like down the line, we'd love to blend both movies together into one master cut like we did the Ghost cut. and put Never Hike in the Snow at the beginning of it, and maybe do some other stuff at the beginning. But it sort of kind of created this opportunity for me to go back and be like, okay, now I have 6 more years experience on set, directing, producing, first ADing, working on big sets, small sets, going back and forth, doing both of them. Let's make Never Hike Alone how we should have made it in the first place. And not to say that Never Hike Alone 1 is, you know, not like good. Like I love Never Hike Alone 1. In
Dude,
fact,
I fucking love that movie, dude.
Yeah, me too.
Are you a wrestling fan at all?
not as much.
Because that fucking choke slam, dude, in the first one is so good.
Well, I do recognize that there's definitely a cross pollination between horror fans and wrestling fans.
It's true, yeah.
So when I was thinking of like what are things that we can do and afford from a stunt standpoint that would do work, and I was like, well, a choke slam through a table would be pretty good.
Dude,
Like,
it was well done. I'm not a big wrestling fan or anything. I mean, I was when I was a kid. I think everybody kind of was our age, but it just was so well done, and the table broke so well, man. It was so cool. I was like, oh shit,
yeah.
this is great, man. But
so
the way you're going to kind of reminds me of Flanagan a little bit with like Doctor Sleep.
Yep.
You know, where he kind of reshot all those scenes for The Shining, you know what I mean, and just did them way better. And you know, the scene where Danny's on the tricycle and stuff, and like has the same feel, and you feel like you're watching The Shining again, but it's just a little bit more enhanced. So I'm super excited for that, man. That's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely the approach that we took. It was just enhancing everything a little bit more, and that's really just about like, and that's just the first quarter of the movie or first third of the movie, really. It's kind of retracing those steps, because then once we get into the ambulance scene and we get after the ambulance scene, it's all new material from there for people. But as you saw in the sneak preview, like we're starting off from Tommy's perspective, and we're going to see a day in the life of Tommy Jarvis about who he is in this modern day and what he deals with, and you're going to meet Dr. Diana Hill again from Never Hike in the Snow, who lost her son Mark, and you're going to meet Rick Cologne again. And it's, you know, everything's 3 months removed from Never Hike in the Snow. I mean, it's funny, this is a sequel to Never Hike Alone, but this is also a sequel to Never Hike in the Snow.
Yeah.
And it actually is more of a faithful sequel to Never Hike in the Snow, because it really picks up on those storylines, because originally this was all built as one big piece. And it really goes to like kind of cover that, like the way I sort of pitch to people is that like Tommy Jarvis is a bit of a Don Quixote. Like he's been out in the woods chasing the dragon for all these years, but he just keeps running into windmills, and he never can produce the dragon. He can never prove that it's true. It's like Bigfoot hunters, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you have Rick, who's still trying to solve this crime. He lost a deputy. He never was able to solve what happened to this Mark guy. And there's also a ton of missing people from this town that have been disappearing over the years. And that's what Disappear was about. And so you come up with this concept of like, there's this ghost in the forest that is snatching people's souls for one reason or another, and no one can figure out who's doing it. Tommy knows Jason is doing it, but isn't able to basically prove that he's there. Rick thinks Tommy's doing it because he's crazy and he's trying to be a hero and say that, you know, he's not chasing a dragon in the woods, he's creating a dragon in the woods so he can make himself look like a hero again. And then you have Dr. Diana Hill, who's looking for closure about what happened to her child. What happened to him? Because he didn't just die, he disappeared. They can't find him, you know? So there's this sort of, there's all these like untethered storylines that are floating in the wind. I mean, Never Hike in the Snow has an ultimate cliffhanger ending, and that's why everyone got mad at me, because they didn't realize they were watching a pilot episode. You know what I mean? They're watching episode 1 of that season, and I'm not going to get to the conclusion in episode 1.
Right.
Episodes 2, 3, and 4 are coming up. And then you'll get your conclusion, and you'll have your finality thing by the end and get to that. So with these sort of 4 characters, and then you obviously have Andrew Lady coming back as Kyle MacLeod, and you have Kyle MacLeod, and we know what he went through in Never Hike Alone. We know that he was the first person in 20-something years to go into Camp Crystal Lake and make it out with his life. Mm-hmm. And that's the catalyst that changes everything. Everything in story is life was going a certain way until this happened. Well, life was going a certain way for Rick. Life was going a certain way for Tommy. Life was going a certain way for Diana. And then one day, Kyle MacLeod stumbled out of the forest with a bunch of wounds, almost dead. And Jason was coming after him. And Jason was so pissed off, he was starting to return to who he was, not the recluse anymore, but now the hunter. Now he's pissed.
Got that he's got that second wind.
The second, he's in rage mode. You know
He's
what I
got
mean?
the second wind. Hell yeah.
And so he's on a mission to make it happen, because if this guy gets away, the secret's out. He's failed. He's, after all these years, he's finally failed. He's finally been there. And like, so all of these characters sort of have to get over their own shit or work together to understand that like Jason is coming, and they have to sort of work around their differences and or work around sort of like their hang-ups and things like that, and come together as a team, never hike alone, to confront Jason. And you know, it's not that like, you know, obviously the story with Rick isn't that he just all of a sudden figures out that Jason's coming. Like, he spends most of the movie thinking Tommy did it. And so Tommy's under, like Jason Friday the 13th part 6, like Tommy really has to avoid the cops for a little while because they don't believe in Jason. You know what I mean? They live in reality and no one has seen Jason. So it's such a great, to me, like, it's a fan film, but this so seamlessly fits into so many themes about the original Friday the 13th series. It feels like it could be an extension of the series. Like,
yeah,
in an actually
more.
That's
It's
what
more
it,
than
that's
a
what it
fan
definitely
film.
feels like. Even your ideas with Jason, man, are like
Are crazy,
stuff that's never been discussed at all, you know, not even in theories, I feel like. So that's a totally different aspect of
yeah,
this.
and we're not really like chasing like any like wild theories either, because you know there's fan films that like, you know, I worked on, you know, Jason Rising, which was a complete like reboot after Final Chapter. It was a requel, and that was a lot of fun to come up with new concepts and a headless Pamela that was running around and like added all these different elements to it, and like that was a lot of fun. And like there's a lot of different elements that other fan filmmakers have pursued, and you know, for better and for worse, sometimes they feel like a little cockeyed because it's just so much sort of like there's a certain level of like when you want to tell a fan film that like you cross a boundary where it's just like, all right, now you're just being a super nerd. Like this is only stuff that like even Friday the 13th fans, you'd only have to have like a certain sliver of Friday the 13th fans that would actually be into the storyline for them to actually want to see it, versus like a universal Friday the 13th story that all fans can kind of look at and be like, no matter what favorite Friday you have, there's an element in our film that reflects your movie that you love. And there's something about Jason that reflects what you love. And it's mostly a cross-pollination of like the best movies, part 6, part 4, and part 2 to me.
Yeah.
And, you know, and obviously part 1 is a big influence because we say that Camp Crystal Lake has never been returned to. That's sort of like our big retcon, is that like Camp Forest Green wasn't on Camp Crystal Lake. It was just like very close to Crystal Lake. It was like right next door. Like if Packanack was close, this was even closer. But no one has ever returned to Camp Crystal Lake because everyone's too scared to actually go there. No one would actually ever go there because they do really feel it's cursed. So the you know, the land has never sold. No one has ever wanted to go and clean the place up. No one ever wants to go out there. So it's just really this place where people kind of wander out there sometimes to check it out, but it doesn't really work out well for them.
So I have a question.
yeah.
You're picking up after Manhattan, right? Like that's in your head. That's kind of where you're going with this.
Yeah, let me see what it would be. It would be 19 years after Manhattan, because Manhattan technically happened in 1998.
So what is your thought process on how he got back? Like,
and that's what the Ghost of Crystal Lake is about. And that's sort of like the prequel that we've teased, that if we raise $300,000 that we will go and make, but it's too late in the game for us to raise $300,000 and go make that this year, because it's a complete rebuild of like so many different things and what I would have to do to pull that production together. That's why I think I might have to entertain some alternate ideas, like either animating it or doing a graphic novel, or just using this money to make sure that Never Hike Alone 2 comes out the way it's supposed to do it, and look at that down the line. But for me, that's the story that bridges the gap of everything. It's the Ghost of Crystal Lake. It's the birth of Ghost Jason. It's the birth of, it's his rebirth from the Jason we knew in the Paramount movies to this Jason that you see in our Never Hike Alone movies. And the story about that is, it's different. It's just a different, it's sort of like Never Hike Alone in a way where it's not your typical Friday film. Like Never Hike Alone 2 is kind of a typical Friday film. Like it fits all the narratives, like it fits the structure, sort of fits the formula in a certain way. And so it's more of traditional Friday, but this one is more of it's like a drama. And
Yeah.
it's this really sad story. And there's the two main characters are Jason and this like, army ranger who's a little bit like John Rambo, where he's a vagabond, he's a wandering, vagrant who is running from something in his life, and he's left his other life behind, could have a wife and kids somewhere out there, but whatever he's carrying around is like weighing him like an albatross around his neck. And so he one day wanders into not Camp Crystal Lake, but he one day wanders into the town of Crystal Lake, almost like Annie in part one, and he's looking for work. He goes into the diner and, hey, anybody knows like hiring around town, any jobs open, and nobody's saying anything. And then they mention that there's a woman with a farm on the edge of town that maybe like her husband just died, and she may be looking for some, an extra helping hand around the farm. So he ends up going out to the farm, offering some help. And it's a little bit of an influence in part 5 with Ethel in a way. And even the way I wrote it, it's Ethel's sister who took over the farm after she died.
Oh, shit.
Okay.
And she's a little bit nicer though. And sort of this woman gives him a job working on the farm, earning a little bit of money. But he just doesn't have a place to stay. And so she says, there's a couple of spots in town. He's like, I don't have the money to stay at a spot in town. She's like, well, you can always camp out in the woods. He's like, I'd actually prefer that. Like, I'd rather camp out in the woods and have my own space and be in my own peace than really own anybody money and being around people and all that stuff, because I just need to be alone. And he ends up wandering out into the forest looking for a place to stay and stumbles upon a cabin on the side of the lake. And it just so happens to be the main cabin from Never Hike Alone. And he realizes that there's this abandoned camp. He doesn't know shit about the story. He's like, he doesn't care. Like, it's just a place that he can go and like work on. And like, he goes and works on the farm. He comes back to the camp. He fixes it up a little bit, creates a little place for him to stay. He has a little place to stay in front of the campfire, and he's peaceful. But at night, he dreams about war, and he dreams about the things he did in the war. And he's conflicted. You can see those things are happening. And so that's his story. At the same time, happening at the same sort of thing is like the film would actually start off with a fucking flume ride, which is it's you and Jason riding down the sewers of New York, getting flushed out into the sea, and his body floating down to the bottom of the Hudson River, supplanting into the sand. And as he's just sort of melted and his mask is gone and his clothes are gone, and he looks like a concept drawing from the Mummy, like the Brendan Fraser Mummy. I don't know if you've ever seen that photo, but like sort of just like nothing to him. He's just skin and bones at this point because he's been melted by this toxic waste. And as he's sitting there beaten up after his, run-in with Rennie and the other character, he hears a voice, and it's his mother, and it's a vision of his mother. And he looks up and she says, Jason, come home. And so he gets up and he starts to walk home. And so over a course of months, Jason is walking home, and he's running into people as he's walking home, but he's weak. So he's killing people in different ways. And so there's sort of like this ticking time clock of like, you're with this John Rambo character, him working at the farm, and you're seeing like newspaper clippings and news reports of like people are dying, and it seems to be like a line that's like heading back to Crystal Lake, but eventually he's going to get there. It's like Godzilla coming onto the sea back towards Japan. You know what I mean? So eventually the film gets to a point where Jason returns to camp, but he's in no position to fight. And this character of, we'll just call him John for now. He sees Jason, but he's sort of a ghost. He's not coming out and confronting him. He's slinking into the shadows, trying to hide, trying to stay away, because he doesn't think he can actually take this guy at this point. Like, he knows he can't. He's just trying to get back to his mother, because his mother's somewhere in the camp and he's got to rescue her. And so it turns into this different type of story at that point. I don't want to spoil anything.
Okay.
But this is where the supernatural elements that surround Jason's existence sort of take another form. And they take this character on a ride. And it's something that like basically like a curse makes him relive the worst moment of his life. Like, he gets stuck in this sort of like alternate reality type thing as he's moving through the camp. And in one
Who,
moment,
Jason, right?
no, the John character.
Okay.
And so as he passes through one room, he'll end up somewhere else. Like the rooms don't lead to rooms anymore. The rooms lead to like a memory and all of this stuff. And it sort of leads to the end. And like sort of like what you get at the end is what you start to figure out by the end is like what this guy is wearing. And some of the things that he finds are what Jason ends up wearing to become Ghost Jason.
Okay.
So that's sort of like.
So this story is mainly based on John. Like it would be his story.
It would be his story. And
so
how
it would be a drama. Yeah. So that's wow. Like
there is an Easter egg in Never Hike Alone 2 where you will see this character on a missing persons poster that will be in a very prominent shot. He's sort of like, there's a shot with like a bunch of like file folders from the police, and you'll see a bunch of characters you recognize from the previous films. And then there's going to be one character that you won't recognize, who you'll see the name. And I can't remember the name that I used. I'm using John just because we mentioned John in this, but it's different from what I written down. I just can't remember it this time. But in the years of like what Disappear is, like that story of people coming into town and disappearing, he is the first one. He was the first one to go missing in this time span between, you know, him returning from Manhattan to where we are in Never Hike Alone. And that's the opening chapter of the Never Hike Alone verse. And Never Hike Alone 2 is the closing chapter of the Never Hike Alone verse, unless some studio comes along and wants me to resurrect Jason after this and do it again. I'll come up with a story.
What are your thoughts on, like, you know, and I don't want to spoil anything or you to spoil anything, but like from him, from Manhattan to Crystal Lake, how would you do that? You know, like he's walking around all fucked up and looking. You
wouldn't go to you wouldn't like all of a sudden jump to Jason and like he's dragging his leg down the side of the road with his thumb.
Yeah.
Right.
You would go to a character that would be a new character, and you would there would be a short little story in there for them that like somebody stopped at a rest stop to take a piss.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And they see somebody passed out by a dumpster and they go to help them. And when they turn it around, it's like Jason who's collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And like Jason reaches up and rips their throat out because he saw him. You know what I mean? It's things like that. So like you would keep cutting away to different people. And it's like you tell a chapter in John's story, you jump to a chapter in Jason's story. In fact, this is very much modeled after sort of a First Blood type of sort of storytelling style. And the original David Morrell novel of First Blood have you ever read it?
No.
So when you read it, like, so we've all seen we've seen First Blood, we've seen Rambo, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. The Morrell novel, I highly recommend reading this reading this film, reading this book. The way that it works is when you read chapter 1, that's from Rambo's perspective. When you read chapter 2, that's from Teasel's perspective. When you read chapter 3, that's from Rambo's perspective. Chapter 4, and it goes back and forth. And so you read it from Rambo's perspective and you go, man, Teasel's a dick. And then you read it from Teasel's perspective and you go, man, Rambo's a dick. And then you go back to Rambo, Teasel's a dick. And then you start to realize that like, they're both dicks. Like they're both these two forces that like won't let up and just keep coming at each other. Like, and that's that story for that book. But I just like the concept and the structure of two moving objects that are coming closer to each other through each part of their chapter.
That's super cool.
And so that's how I would kind of formulate that one and sort of do that. And at the end of it, just sort of like you would get that triumphant shot of Jason as we see him in the Never Hike Alone movies, sort of taking that form and returning home and coming to claim his throne.
Yeah. I've got another question. You know, I'm trying to dig into this. This is very. You're such a storyteller, and this is so much fun to listen to.
Thank you.
How does he come up with the ghost talk? Like how the
well, there's a hint in Never Hike in the Snow.
Okay.
There's that room that they go through. That's an equipment room, and this was always my original thing. Was that like we know that in Friday the 13th, at the end of part 8, his second or third mask at this point has been destroyed. Mm-hmm. He has no mask. So where could Jason find another mask? You would have to find it at camp somehow. Well, we know that Camp Crystal Lake, they tried to open it, I believe, in either 62 or 63 and 67. And in one year, they had the water get poisoned and go bad. And in another year, they had a fire. And so my idea was that at some point during that time, there was a plan while they were building out the camp again, that they were going to do a winter camp, and they were going to invite kids out, and they were going to have hockey and, all these different things. And so they bought a bunch of equipment, and somewhere in a storage shed, which actually Mabry stumbles through, there is a stack of masks, and the one that he picks up is a Roy style mask. But you notice that it's made out of the same type of material and structure as the Ghost Jason mask.
Yeah.
And so basically where Jason gets this mask, and actually it's John who's the one who first discovers it, it's from this pile. It's from the same pile. And there's sort of like there's a scene in the movie, I guess I'll sort of spoil this part, but there's a scene in the movie where John's sort of like building stuff in the camp, and he comes across the hockey equipment. So one of the ways that he passes time is he basically plays street hockey in that big main hall, and he shoots pucks and balls into the fireplace as just a way to sort of like kill time when he can't, like, he's up at 2 a.m. You know what I mean? He can't get any sleep. So he's just killing time, slapping stuff in there and going around and like, he's coming around, Rainbow comes up and he scores. He's by himself and he's doing that type of things and sort of like just entertaining himself and having fun.
May I add something? I'm so happy that you have hockey in there. Like that's my thing. And I'm so happy about that, but continue.
But yeah, and that's basically like, you see that, like, at least that's sort of where the mask can sort of come from, that it's an organic thing that was in the camp, and that Jason, in this sort of, place in his life, doesn't want to see his raggedy ass body in a mirror. He doesn't want to catch himself in a reflection in a broken window because it scares him. Like, he doesn't know how he's living. He doesn't know why he's here. Like, how does he not die yet? Like, even he's like, what is going on? Like, there's nothing left. Right. And so he uses clothes, and he wants to dress himself because there's a part of him that wants to feel normal. There's a part of him that wants to feel like he's not what he is. He's something, that, like, how did he go from this innocent young kid who drowned one day, trying, when nobody like paid attention to him for a swimming lesson, to this mass murderer?
Yeah, like how did he become the villain?
Yeah, well, I mean, he became the villain because him and his mother were neglected, and her years of being neglected led to her snapping and killing people because no one ever paid attention to them, because no one ever gave them the time of day because of who they were. He was a single mom with a mentally handicapped and physically deformed child, maybe not even mentally handicapped. They just assumed that he was mentally handicapped because he looked weird.
Right.
Are you bringing Pamela back at all? Is that a thing?
I mean, we brought Pamela back in Never Hike in the Snow.
Yeah,
she is on the cast list for Never Hike Alone 2. We do want to incorporate Pamela in the story. I won't say how we'll do it, but she will get incorporated into the story because there is there's obviously, like, that's the connection. For me, Friday the 13th is about the mother and the son. Mm-hmm. Those are the two things that connect our worlds. That's the reason why he's there. That's the reason why he's killing. That's why when I see stories of, like, going after the father, I'm like, what direction are you going in? Because it has nothing to do with dad. Like, dad is a nobody. Dad's a deadbeat. Dad left him a long time ago. He doesn't get to show up now and be like, now that my son's made 12 movies, it's time for me to make my debut. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, okay, where were you in the last 25 years of my life? You know what I mean? Like, so that's why, I mean, I've always stressed that with people, is that, like, you're really got to focus down on that type of storytelling. And that's really the theme of Friday the 13th, is the mother and the son. Those are the two things that are connected. Those are the stories that go there. We don't, Pamela shows up in a few different films. I mean, obviously I wish we got Betsy a little bit more, but she shows up in 2 films. We got, mom shows up in Freddy versus Jason. It's a big part of how Freddy is able to manipulate Jason.
Right.
And Pamela probably should have been in more movies. You know what I mean? Like, in the remake,
I agree.
I feel like in the remake, they really kind of did her dirty. They sort of, like, really undersold her character, and really sort of, it was very, like, superficial the way that it worked. In a way, it was like, oh, we saw her a little bit at the beginning of the movie, but we didn't really see her face. And then we see her in this really crusty photo that you can't really see, that we never really get a good shot of. But because the character says that they look like each other, we got to know that that's the reason why Jason's doing everything that he's doing.
Right.
Okay. And to me, that's not great writing. That's very clunky, like, dialogue heavy, like, explaining to the audience about, like, you need to pay attention to this, and I'm going to say it out loud this very specific way, and it doesn't feel like natural language by somebody. It feels like, oh, I feel like I'm being, like, sold something versus, like, naturally learning about something. I didn't feel like I naturally kind of learned. I felt like this is being force fed to me.
Yeah, I feel like in the remake they kind of basically do the ending of the first movie, right? At the beginning, kind of. It's not like the exact, but
yeah, yeah,
it's just
and
like
like
that quick intro scene, and it's basically her.
yeah, and she's
that's it.
dragging that like giant machete behind her, and it's just like, where
Yeah.
did that thing come from? Like, who's using that at camp?
Yeah.
You know, it's
Where's
like
that laying
Jason's.
around?
Where's that laying around? And you know, did Pamela make that? And they're sort of, you know, and they get like, you should have been watching him.
Yeah.
Like, just really sort of, you know, even the way it's shot, there's just sort of, you can't really see what's going on, and
I know it was super dark as well. Yeah.
like yeah, it was like an intro for an intro.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, and it was very like, I think it was just modeled to be Jason being fucking badass Jason, and they wanted to make money off that probably.
Yeah, no, and I mean they had their, you know, their style. Derek, I think, did a great job
Yeah.
with what he was given as far as the
Yeah.
script. I think some of the situations they put Jason in didn't make a lot of sense.
No.
You know, like him stealing gas during the middle of the day while people are working doesn't seem like a very Jason
Yeah.
thing to do,
Yeah.
especially when you spent like a year pitching this movie about how smart Jason was in this movie, and that was probably the dumbest thing he could do.
Kane,
Same thing.
Kane Hodder told me once, he was like, Jason doesn't live underground. Like he was just very, very upset about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's another thing.
they kind of went their own route of like, what has Jason been doing this whole time? He's been building like this underground layer, basically.
Yeah, so like one of the things I will say this, I will give the remake credit for this. The remake gave me inspiration to make Never Hike Alone, because I was like, this is not what it needs to be. Let me show you what it needs to be.
Right.
As a fan, as a fan with no money, show you what I wanted to see. And
Right.
what I wanted to see was a Jason who was adept to, like, what have we seen Jason do before? We saw him build a shack. So Jason has a little bit of carpentry skill. He
Yeah.
can sort of build some things. Like, I'd rather see Jason build trap walls, false walls, things where like a cabin is actually double the size of what it is, but like he's built this wall to sort of get behind it and hide and almost hide behind the walls like Billy does in
Yeah.
with Black Christmas. And or like, you know, The Boy or something like that, where they live in the wall or something like that. Not that Jason's living in the walls like it's the fucking people under the stairs and he's Roach fucking crawling around, but like that there was something that like when you step into a cabin, you realize like, wait, there's another wing of this cabin that's not there. And honestly, when I went to this abandoned camp and started filming there, that's a lot of what we did was build false walls and like hide doors and make it look like there isn't a door into another room, because when we did that, we were actually hiding a bunch of equipment that we were storing in the room so we can come back up and like start building more stuff. So like right now at the camp, I have a walled off room that if you don't know that it's there, you wouldn't know that it's there. But in that room are like brooms, like hammers, like toolkits, wood, screws, like first aid kits, like a whole thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How I would imagine that Jason would operate, that he would operate within what he has at the actual camp at his disposal, versus like creating something brand new that doesn't necessarily jive with what we've seen from Friday the 13th films in the past. And it doesn't matter if they put a wheelchair in the tunnel. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care about the wheelchair. I want something that feels natural for Jason to be at. And that's where a lot of it, like even Jason's look in the remake sort of had me off put, because it just seems so overly stylized versus something that felt like something that we would actually wear.
Yeah.
And so Ghost Jason, what he wears feels like something that like somebody would wear. He took these clothes from somebody.
Yeah, he has like a hermit feel to him almost. Like
yeah,
he's
but
kinda...
it's like I've never seen a jacket like the one he wears. I've never seen a machete like the one he wields. I've never, you know, and it's not to say that like films have to be so rooted in reality that like it's that. It's not
realistic to day-to-day life. Like like you said, you haven't seen that jacket. Like it's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's just, and so he becomes sort of like this larger than life cartoon character versus this character that feels like he belongs in a world. And I feel like if Jason feels like he belongs in a world, he's a little bit more scary because it feels like Jason could be out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Like, you know, even then, like the way things all fit together, like I didn't think that the mask fit very well on the face. Like it just didn't. There were things that were unbalanced about the costume for me as like from a look standpoint that it really bothered me. And that was when and it all started with building Ghost Jason. I was like, I want to build a Jason that sort of incorporates the old school stuff and the new school stuff. And like they started putting the jacket in Jason and Jason X, like that's his first jacket, and it's like very thin and already ripped up and all that stuff, so it's not really there. Freddy versus Jason, he's got the hobo jacket, which is just built bulky and it looks like a burlap sack wrapped in like rat shit, and like just kind of, and it's just really big and bulky and dopey. And then he's got the big trench coat in the remake. And so I was like, what's something that is, I mean, I'm fond of the part 4 look where he's got that Sears work shirt, the tan pants, the brown boots or the black boots, and it's just simple. So I was like, okay, let me find like, what's a Sears work shirt in jacket form? Oh, well, it's an M65 Vietnam military jacket.
Right.
And, okay, what do we want to do for a sweater underneath? Well, you could do like a plain sweater, but the waffle knit sort of has that sort of same quality of Mrs. Voorhees' sweater.
Yeah.
And we'll use a neutral color of gray and then just soak it in a lot of blood for all the people that he's killed over the years. And it's dried, so that shows up and shows through, but it's not white. So, white's sort of like an off-putting color and bright, and gray sort of dull. And then you go into the brown pants, the black boots, the gray skin because he's undead. And this mask that feels like, when I was designing this mask with CFX, I mean, it was about like something that felt like it had weight to it. Like all the repro masks that I had purchased, like a part 3 mask and a part 4 mask and a part 6 mask. Like every time I got them, it was like this thin plastic that was like bendable. And then like when it was on my face, you can see that it was getting pulled and like it wasn't rigid. It wasn't there. I mean, the Ghost Hawk is like, it's thick.
Yeah. Oh,
you know
wow.
what I mean? Like
that's like a NECA style hawk
and
almost.
In fact, the first hawk that I ever wore in the first teaser was a NECA style hawk because this was still being constructed. I just shaved off all the chevrons.
That is very thick. I like that.
And I like that. I like the fact that when I picked up the NECA replica hawk, that
it doesn't
this
give
has weight.
Yeah, that thing does not give at all.
The only thing is that it's kind of fragile. I dropped it and it cracked, so I had to get another one.
Really?
Yeah. And so
I've not dropped any of mine yet. So
yeah. So I was like, I wanted something like that. It took me a while. CFX eventually came along and said that they do it. The artist's name is Brett Morris, who sculpted and made this and painted it. And then it's been touched up over the years by artists. Kelsey did a pass on it. Nora did a pass on it just to keep the paint correct. But when I got this, it was sort of like the final piece of the puzzle. And I had the open jacket, Sears work shirt. The jacket wasn't too big, but it was big enough to give what they said, like when they made the remake, which is like, when he moves around, it sort of has like that whoosh feeling. Like you see the jacket kind of flare out when he moves and it creates like a cool silhouette and stuff like that, which is actually smart in there. So we're using those types of techniques, and even people are like, oh, I hate the jacket and blah, blah, blah. Like it warms up on people the more you see it, because not only is it a natural look that you feel like somebody can actually put together, but when you look at the practicality of it, he's earth colors. He's the colors of the forest.
Yeah.
When he stands into the woods, he's going to blend in.
Right.
You know what I mean? If he doesn't move, then you wouldn't even know he was there. And like, it is I do want to do one shot in Never Hike Alone 2, where like Jason's going to be standing in the background somewhere and you're not going to realize he's there until he moves.
Yeah.
And it becomes like
clear as day almost too. Like once he moves, right?
Yeah. You're like, oh, whoa, what was that? You know what I mean? And it really sort of, and it sort of shows that like what his sort of power is in a way. And the fact that like, and again, from a design standpoint, that like, it just feels natural. Yeah. And it looks menacing and it works.
Dude, man, you got your work cut out for you, man, on this new one, but I'm super excited for it, man.
Yeah, man, it's a lot of work, but it's all spread out. So, at the end of the day, we like this week, I'm just focusing on what we're doing here. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like we're just focusing on that, and that's all we need to do. And then next week, we're like, we do exterior, interior, and then I have 3 weeks off, and then we go back to that lake in Carson, and we shoot like there's more to be shot for like other parts at the beginning of the movie, and then there's parts that are shot at the end of the movie. Right. And so we're gonna get those, and those are really like kind of like we get to extend what we're doing in the opening scene, and then we have a couple more weeks, and then we do all the camp stuff. And so the camp stuff, the ambulance scene, all that stuff, and then in July it's our bonus kill scene and one other scene that I removed from the schedule because it was like this one scene that's like really easy to do, but if I spend my time doing that, I lose time on other scenes. So I was sort of like, oh, you know what? I gotta like, okay, let me just put it over here and I'll get those people out at that time. And I can actually hire a much smaller crew to come out and shoot that because it's only a few characters. We can shoot that sort of the old school Never Hike Alone style where I only need like one cameraman, one gaffer. We can set up all the stuff ourselves, do all the stunts ourselves because there's nothing really kind of there. There's no big effects in that scene. So it'll end up working out well for us.
Cool, man. How's shooting at night anyway? I keep asking people that. Is it super tough to shoot at night? Do you just push a bunch of light on everything or do you do
like
day for night stuff or
no. Day for night looks like garbage all the time. We get a bunch of lights. I mean, you get lights, you get the powerful lights, you stick them in the background, you jack them up as high as you can, and you blast them. Yeah, you just get that moonlight cutting across like the entire forest and go. Like, there's a lot of stuff. Like, what's nice is like when we made Never Hike Alone, we were using 4K lights, which are really big, powerful lights, and we had those jacked up on not combo stands, but there's something, not the long johns either. There's one in between, but it had a crank. You can get it up as high as we could, and we put it way out in the camp, and we had it kind of blasting in, but it wasn't really that high up. It was just enough to kind of like just get everything baked in light. That way the sensors were picking something up. So Never Hike Alone 1, we shot with 2 different cameras at that point where we shooting night scenes. We had a red camera that we used during the day, and then we used another camera called the Panasonic Varicam. The Varicam has an ISO of 2500, which allows you to bump all the way up and get native ISO without any grain or noise.
Wow.
So, and then originally we were going to shoot with the AS7 II because that also had, I think, either a 2000 or a 2500 native ISO that was going to allow us to sort of bump that up. So yeah, we had 4K lights, and then we can bump all the way up to 25 ISO and shoot clean. And then we brought in a bunch of Kino flows back then to sort of be our fill lights. Now everything's changed. Now you can get 4K like power out of LED panels that you can jack way up and are much lighter and easier to work with. Instead of having to bring out Kino flows with all these different things, you just have either quasars or stereotubes that are doing the same thing, and you can wrap the same way. I mean, it's basically what a Kino was. That's really kind of the secret, is just blast it with light.
That makes sense with being able to jack the ISO up too, because I didn't realize, because a lot of indie filmmakers, I mean, you get the grain, you know what I mean? It's just
and they might be shooting with a lot of filmmakers like shoot with a Black Magic, or they're shooting with some type of DSLR, or
right,
maybe the GX7 or something like that. You're shooting with things that don't have that type of power.
Right.
But our DP Evan Bucka now has a red Ranger Monstro, so that thing is beautiful, and it shoots very well at night, and we're able to do everything. And we have the equipment, we have the team now that has the ability to shoot it like not like Warner Brothers going out and shooting something,
right,
but any other independent film that's out there working with stuff, we're basically working with the same equipment that they are.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Let's back up just a bit, because I want to know this. What got you into this? Like, what made you want to tackle this franchise?
I mean, I was always just a big Friday fan. I grew up a Friday fan. I grew up in a small like farm town. My family, way back in the day, got this like land on a lake. My grandfather lives on the lake. I live across the street.
Where are you from, if you don't mind me asking?
Westport, Massachusetts.
Nice. New England guy, just like
I saw that Celtic hat.
Like to hear.
Yeah, my brother, I'm on a chat with my brothers. I got 2 younger brothers, and they're huge Celtics fans, and all they do is like bitch and moan about the Celtics.
And I came on here, I was looking for better moods because they lost tonight, so I was kind
of I heard. I can tell. I can always tell what the Celtics are doing by what's going on in the chat.
Yeah,
and they just have like their secret language of like things that they say. And I'm like, okay, the Celtics aren't doing well tonight. So I just grew up around there, and then one day I saw Friday the 13th, fell in love with the movie. But then I grew up in the lake, and I remember I saw part 6, and he got locked at the bottom of the lake, and I thought that Jason was at the bottom of my lake. And I used to try. If there was ever an ability to swim on top of the water, that's what I was trying to master, because I didn't want him to grab my leg. And I just grew up obsessed with Friday the 13th. I was a big athlete as a kid. Every single sport I played, I wore the number 13.
Oh, cool.
Like no matter what it was. And especially like there was a couple years in football, I had to wear 15 because one of the seniors had 13. It always pissed me off. I was just, I want 13. Like that's my number. Like, and so I did that, and I always liked Friday the 13th, and I watched the films like incessantly, and it actually got me into filmmaking because it was one of the few kind of horror films that had a really in-depth behind the scenes sort of document on like a lot of the films. And obviously like Crystal Lake Memories came out. Before that, his name was Jason. It was a lot of coverage on it, and it always made me think like, how do they do this? Like, how did they make that dude's eyeball pop out? How did they crush that dude's skull? How does that happen? Where does that happen? How does it make it happen? And then, why does he change from part 2 to part 3 so drastically? And why does he even change a little bit more in part 4? And what happened to him in part 5? And part 6, he looks completely different. Part 7, he's completely different. It's like, why is nobody paying attention to this? Like, why does he look different? And not understanding that was something called continuity. And like, it becomes such a fun franchise to like read about. So then like I find out about Friday the 13th franchise.com, like when I was like a teenager and like and then in college and stuff like that. And so you're on the internet and you're reading about each film, and somebody's gone through and highlighted each of the differences in the movie and all the continuity errors and the logic errors and the information errors and all these different things. And you're like, wow, like, it's just something you can really pick apart to learn. And like by picking it apart and learning about all the things that are wrong with Friday the 13th, it can teach you a lot about filmmaking. And so when I had come to the end of my college career of like, I was done playing baseball. I was looking for what I was going to do next in my life because I wasn't going to the majors anytime soon. My arm was about to fall off. I'm one of those dudes that like, well, I would have made it if I didn't blow out my shoulder, but I blew out my shoulder doing friggin' extreme sports. So that was my problem, was that I killed my shoulder as a kid doing that, and it caught up with me later in life. But I had fallen in love with film, and I thought that. And there's also the other inspiration would have been Pee-wee's Big Adventure. So he's rolling around Warner Brothers, goes through a Godzilla set, goes through Twisted Sister music video, goes through all these different things. And I'm like, where does all this happen? Like, this is a place that does all this stuff. Like, I want to go there. And that's sort of like those kind of things where like, I want to go to where movies are made. Like, I want to see, how is a movie made? Like, how do you come up with just this idea? How does this idea go to a screen and for us to see around the world? And I moved after college. I worked at a liquor store for like a year, saved a bunch of money, moved to LA with my friends. I had one friend who was already living out here, got me a job working as a PA on Furious Case of Benjamin Button's VFX department, and started to sort of learn the rigmarole. Kind of went through this before, but then I got into feature animation, and I worked my way through feature animation. And I got to a point in my career where the reason why I had moved to LA was one day I wanted to work on a Friday the 13th film. I wanted to be on set when Jason was out there, and I just wanted one moment where I get to stand next to the Jason actor and be like those people in the behind the scenes photos, and see it happen, and then see the effect that it would have on an audience. Like Saw was a big influence for me, where I went and saw Saw for the first time in college, and Jigsaw stands up at the end of the movie, and I went, holy crap. And then I brought all my friends to go see it. And when that moment happened, I turned around in my seat to see what the reaction would be. And I saw all the jaws drop, and I was like, I want to work on something that makes people do that.
Yeah.
And so I had moved in 2008. I had already missed the boat on getting hired for 2009. I sent like emails and called Michael Bay Films and all this stuff, and I never really got through. And then I went, okay, when they start to do the next one, I'm going to find out whoever's doing it, and I'm going to submit a resume because now I have working experience, and I'm going to go work on that film. The only problem is that they never made a film. And I started to get bored. And 2009 had created such a turmoil in me as a fan, and I had spent so many years arguing with people on chat forums and like bulletin boards about like what a Friday the 13th should be. And eventually I just said, like, why don't I just stop telling everybody what a Friday the 13th film should be, and I should go make one. And so that's when I was like, well, if I need to make one, I need to build a costume. And I built my first version of a costume with a shitty latex hood. I got the Sears work shirt, but it was like a Dickies shirt. I got the pants. We went out and filmed some stuff. In fact, if you go to the Womp Somp Films YouTube page, there's something called Happy Friday the 13th. That's the first ever Friday the 13th fan film I ever made. And it's just literally one shot, me chasing my ex-wife through the woods with an axe, and like a shot of me swinging down on the camera, like from part 3. And that was it. But I was just like, that was so much fun. I loved playing Jason. I want to do it again. So I wrote a script called Never Hike Alone. That was about maybe 6 pages. And it was about a hiker running through the woods, running from something, just like in the previous movie that I had made. Gets out to a place where he can see safety. There's a neighborhood. Oh, I'm so close. I'm going to make it. I'm going to live. And then Jason catches them, kills them. And then while Jason's killing them, here's more people coming, drags the body off the trail. And then this other jogger comes along and like comes to this opening in the trail and catches her breath and sort of takes a moment, and then notices like something off the trail and starts to walk towards it. And as she gets there, her hand reaches out and grabs her. And when she turns around, it's her jogging buddy. And he says, "Hey, I'll race you to the end of the trail." And she's like, "Oh, you're on." And they run away. And so then as it watches them run away, the camera then panned down to the hiker who's dead, and he just gets dragged off screen, and it would cut to a title card that said "Never Hike Alone." And it was just a very simple tale. But the problem was I shot that with all the wrong equipment. We didn't have proper sound. The camera wasn't in focus half the time because we didn't have a big monitor. We were shooting like out of a little LCD screen. The DP had never shot, motion picture before. So we had this idea that was sort of incomplete. There was no effects. The last shot of him getting dragged off was all out of focus. And I turned to, my ex at the time, who was also my editor. And I went, "I can't release this. This is not good enough. Like, I'm not going to bring this to the internet and let people make fun of me.
Right.
Like, I need to get better and I need to do something better." So I started to like rework the script. I started to come up with different ideas. I started to work on friends' short films. Like, I worked on a 48-hour film project. Our first 48-hour film project that I directed is called The Red Room, which is also on the Wampstomp Films. It's in my original shorts thing. It's just like, we made that over a weekend, which is pretty cool. And that sort of taught me, oh, okay, all the mistakes I made on making the first Never Hike Alone, I can now learn from and now make a new Never Hike Alone. And I had another type of script that was like very similar to that one, a little bit more expanded. This one was more about like 10 pages, if that, but it probably would have been about 5 to 6 minutes at the end of the day. And we started to film pieces of it. And that eventually became what was our first trailer for Never Hike Alone. Because when we made the first trailer for Never Hike Alone, the idea was that we were going to make something between like 10 and 15 or 20 minutes. That was just very short, very concise. There wasn't a lot of like bells and whistles to it. It was all about the one guy. It was walk into Camp Crystal Lake, meet Jason, and run out. Doesn't walk into one building because we didn't have any buildings to walk into. There was just this group of cabins that I found up in Big Bear that looked like they were abandoned. And we were going to go shoot there just to kind of test it. And at the same time, that's when I knew that I had to be better with my costume, because one of the problems with that first short was every time I turned my head, the latex head popped out of my shirt. And so you saw it moving around and you just couldn't we just couldn't do anything about that. So, I ended up getting a silicone hood from CFX, silicone hands from CFX, and built the Ghost Jason costume, used the NECA mask since it was bigger and bulkier, and sort of like customized it a little bit. And we started shooting this trailer, started making use of drone photography, started making use of good, 4K DSLR, Sony a7 II, like we were able to shoot 4K on a Shogun monitor and shoot it at a high level, make it look cinematic. And when we were shooting that film, or when we were shooting the trailer as a concept at that point, we had met the people who owned those cabins in the woods that we were shooting at that we thought were abandoned. And apparently they were people who live there during the summer, and they're only there during the summer. And I just happened to always kind of go there during off season, but now they were there. They gave us permission to shoot behind their house. And when we were done shooting, they turned to us and said, "Why don't you guys make this at a camp, like an actual camp?" And they're like, "Well, we don't have the money for it." They're like, "No, if you go up the street, there's an abandoned camp." And we're like, "What?" We're like, "Yeah, look." And he pulls out this map, and on it, there was this little blue marker that said college camp. And he says, "It's right here. Look, we're right here. College camp is right there. If you go into this trail behind this campground, and you follow it, you'll find it." And so I was like, "Okay, I don't have time to do that today, but we'll definitely check it out." A few weeks later, I get online and I'm like, okay, college camp, type it into Google Maps, nothing comes up. And I'm like, college camp, Angeles Oaks, California, blah, 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 nothing comes up. All right, let me look at the map. And so I brought the map up on Photoshop, sent it from my phone to the computer and was like, okay, let me look at this. And like, all right, there's the road. And then I went to like Google Maps. And I was like, there's the road. Camp's supposed to be there. Camp's supposed to be there, but there's no address. There's nothing like every time you see a building on Google Maps, there's a little icon that there's a building there.
Yeah.
So I zoom all the way in and I turn on satellite map. And I'm literally going square by square. Where is this place? Until I found a building. I went, oh shit. And I zoomed back out and I looked at the map and I was like, that's about right. Zoomed back in. I was like, where is it? Like, oh, look, there's a road. Let me follow the road. Oh, and here's where it connects to the road. Okay, boom, this is where it is. Mark it on the map, put it into my phone, and said, we're going to go check this out. At the time, I was working in animation. The guy who I mentioned before, Kyle Klein, producer, he was a coordinator that I got hired on another job. My original DP, Chris Stellis, was working for me as a PA. So we got together after work, and I was like, hey, look, I found the place. And I had literally the maps that Mark Hill has in Never Hike in the Snow. Those are my maps from finding the original camp.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
I worked it all into the story to make it sort of like reflect our story in a way. And, and so I go, we're going up here this weekend, don't make any plans. And they're like, all right, let's go. And so we drove up. I had like a Ford Escape at the time. It was only 2-wheel drive, but it worked. We drive up to the camp and pull into the road. And it's like, you really can't, you wouldn't know that there was a road there unless you really looked and you knew that it was there. You might catch it off the side as you're driving by, but you would think that like, oh, it's locked up. You can't go that way. Pull right up to the gate, look at the gate, and the gate is not locked. It's just got a chain on it that has a nut and a bolt that's holding it closed. And so it was like, you guys want to hike this or you want to drive through? And we're like, let's drive through.
Your story right here is literally a Friday the 13th movie.
Well, that's what we were saying. We're like,
the only thing you're missing is someone telling you you're all doomed, like for going there. That's
technically, well, actually, there is a part of that story where we get to where we're told we're all doomed. I'll tell you when we get to the next part. So we open up the gate, we pull through. We are joking at this point, like we are entering a horror movie. We're going to get killed when we get up there, and we got to be careful. And so, like, I literally have like machetes in the back of the car. It's like we're ready to fight like anything that comes out of the wood. So we start to drive up the road, and this road has not been maintained in at least since 1988, because that's when we found out that like this place had been closed. So we literally pull up and there's a giant rock in the middle of the road. So we all get out of the car, we all roll the rock off the road, keep pulling up the road. Then there's a tree that's falling. So we get out, we all pull in the tree, we pull the tree out of the way. We drive up the road, we come around a corner. Like I said, okay, like there's a split in the road and one way goes to a dead end, and that dead end is in Never Hike Alone. It's the one that he pulls up to at the beginning of the movie to start his journey. That's on the same road that goes to this camp. When you go right, it takes you down this little hill and there's a stream. At the time, that stream was only like this deep. And so we just drove right through it. And then it comes around a corner and then it goes up this long hill. And now the hill goes up, but the steep drop off the hill is like that. So like you're literally driving up on the edge and you can look down the edge of this cliff that if you take a wrong turn or if a part of the road collapses, your car is going to dip down and roll down a hill.
Holy shit.
So we're just sort of like favoring one side of the road, driving up this road, get up to the top, start to come around the corner, and then saw the first building. And the first building had a couple of trees that had fallen on top of it. And it was like, whoa, this place is intact. Like when he had pitched it to me, he was like, oh, there's a camp up there and it's still in pretty good shape. Like, you know what I mean? In my head, I'm thinking about everything that I've ever found abandoned in Los Angeles, which is just littered with graffiti.
Yeah.
This place was like untouched.
Whoa.
So we pull up and then we come around another corner, and that's when we saw that big main building. And so we were all like, whoa, cool, this place is so rad. And like we get out, walk into the main building, and it's just very much like that first experience that we saw Kyle MacLeod have when he walks into the main room, where you walk into that main room, there's the two big windows, all that light coming through, and you're there with three filmmakers who are all sitting there going, remember this idea that we had where he comes into camp and he can't get into any of the buildings? Well, now we can get into the buildings. We can expand this story. We can make this a little bit better. So let's figure it out. So this camp became our home away from home. Like every weekend we drove up there. It's a 2-hour drive. We'd get there in the morning. We'd have a little bit of camera equipment that we rented, like a DSLR, or like we'd rent we were testing out different cameras. So we'd rent the Sony A7 II. And if it wasn't available that weekend, we'd grab a Blackmagic, and we were just kind of like shooting the shit in a way. Like, let's just film them walking this way. Let's just film them walking that way. Let's see what happens here. Like if we go from this room to that room, how does it connect? And then, hey, if we have this space, like what do we fill this space with? Because at the time there was just like the ping pong table and like one table and the octagonal table. And, after a while, I started to realize, like, I have a Hollywood set here. Like, if we can figure this out, we can come up and piecemeal this movie. And like, we found the attic and we found the other buildings. And, I would walk into a room and I would say, this was Steve Christie's office. See that shower over there? That's where Marcy got killed. I see this room. This would be a great room for like where Kevin Bacon and his girlfriend got killed. We'll do the bunk beds in here. Or, okay, I need a hallway here. Or I need like, oh, here's the kitchen. Here's where Mrs. Voorhees worked. Here's an attic. And like, ooh, if Jason was going to stay anywhere in this camp, he would be tucked away in this little pantry in the back attic. And so like we created this sort of like these tent poles, places for our character to at least walk through and talk about. And then one day I was walking by and I noticed a red ribbon flickering in the breeze. And it just caught my eye, and there was just something creepy about it. And I didn't even know what it meant. I mean, I think it means to cut down trees, but I had been working on a show. No, I hadn't been working on that show at that point. But I started to think about it. I was like, if we go through the old sets, imagine this is a crime scene that's never been cleaned up. So maybe they tagged off where all the bodies were. And so as he's walking around the camp, we'll come across a tag, and then we know that we're about to step into a crime scene. So even though we didn't have a lot of deaths in Never Hike Alone, we sort of like treated the crime scenes like a revisiting to the original deaths from the original movie.
Right.
And based on that was sort of how we came up with the bones of the Never Hike Alone story, of how to expand it. And then the way that we got it to the next level was I had done the 48-hour film festival. I had met other filmmakers. Some of those filmmakers are the stunt people that still work on Never Hike Alone to this day. And I said, oh, you know what we're going to need if we don't have kills is we're going to do stunts. Instead of killing Kyle, he'll do something that would have killed an old character. Like if it was in the 80s, this would have killed the character. They would have died when they fell off the second story. They wouldn't have moved when the axe came at their face. They would have, died all these different ways. But this guy's a little bit different. He actually survives this stuff. He's tougher. He's quicker. He's, agile. He's strong. Like he can actually fight back. So we sort of just kind of built it around that. And like I said, remember how I was talking before when we started the conversation about like, what do I have to work with? Everything that I wrote was based on something that was there, that was tangible, that I could use.
Right.
And because there was a lot to use, we were able to take this 15-minute to 20 idea and stretch it out into a 54-minute movie. And we made that first movie in 2 seasons. We made it in the fall, where we made all of our mistakes. We did raise a little bit of money. I got about like maybe 15-20 grand to shoot that fall. And we raised another like 20 grand on crowdfunding for the spring, but we really only got to use about 10 to 12 of it because everything else cost money for the campaign. And that's when I came up with, how I sort of like went from, okay, we're going to show up on set and just shoot what's in my head, to, all right, I'm going to predetermine what we're going to shoot way ahead of time and have it all ready to go. And then when we get to set, we know exactly what we're doing. So we're not running into a lot of the trouble that we had in there. Through the break, we had shot the first trailer. With the second round of film, the first round of filming that we did that fall, we were able to create a second trailer that was a little bit more involved. It had actual scenes in it. It had him, walking through the forest, reading the map, going through the camp, searching the actual camp, seeing a lot of the big stuff that like you see in the movie that actually happens in the movie. We were able to shoot some of the stunts. So the stunts we were able to put in the movie. In fact, I think the table slam is in that trailer. That trailer is what we used to sign Tom Matthews in secrecy over the break. So January, my my executive producer, this guy by the name of Barry J, who's actually the guy who owns Barry's Boot Camp. It's a chain of fitness gyms that are worldwide. Barry's a big Friday the 13th fan, managed to get a dinner with Tom Matthews through a friend of his. And it was sort of like a courtesy thing of like just meeting somebody. And then through the process of making the movie, or through the process of like the conversation, he said, hey, I'm making this Friday the 13th fan film with these kids. Would you think about being in the movie? And he was sort of like, I don't really do fan films. And he says, well, just look at the trailer. And so he showed him our first trailer. And he went, oh, it's not bad. I'll have a conversation with the kid. I went and got lunch with Tom Matthews and Barry. And I had showed them both the second trailer. Neither of them had seen yet. And it was at that moment where Tom knew that we were onto something. And then I pitched him what was the formula for how we were going to use him, which made him feel, I think, a little bit more at ease. Was that like, I have no intention of, exploiting you in the sense of that, like, all I have is you. You know what I mean? Like, there's some fan films out there. It's like all they have is a cameo, and like the rest of it is like almost unwatchable.
Right.
But what I wanted to do was like, at the time, if you guys remember, in 2017, at this same time, Friday the 13th had just been canceled. Rings had come out, and Paramount was like, this is bullshit. We're not doing any more of these $25 million remakes of movies that aren't going to make any money. Plus, we're going to lose our rights back to Warner Brothers at the end of the year. So why are we going to start a franchise that they're going to pick up and make all the money on? Because you make all the money on the sequels, not the first one.
Right.
And so they cancel the movie. Friday the 13th fans are bummed. I'm bummed. And I'm sitting down with Tom, and I say, Tom, like, I got 65, 70% of this movie shot. I don't have the money or the time to go back and rewrite all this shit and like work you into the story in like an intricate way. My idea is that if you want to do the movie, we tell nobody. Nobody finds out about it. Like, you say yes today, I'm not going to tell a soul. It's going to be me and you and Barry, and I'm going to tell a couple people on my crew, and then most of the people in the crew aren't even going to figure out till we show up to show your scene. And then we're going to do the whole movie. Our job is that we're going to make a good enough film that's about 45 minutes, at the end of the day with all the material that we have. And then we're going to get to a scene at the end of the movie, and you're going to play a paramedic, which I think is kind of a funny like ode to Return to the Living Dead. Send more paramedics.
Right.
So, and I was like, and I think Tommy could become an ambulance driver. That's actually a job that he could get. It'd be a perfect job for him. And we're going to do this scene, and the character's going to end up there, and then you're going to open the doors, and you're going to be a big surprise to people. And he was like, oh, I love it. That sounds good. And I was like, but in the scene right now, everybody dies. Like, Jason catches up with the ambulance and kills everybody. And that's sort of the end of the movie. And he's like, well, you can't kill Tommy. And I was like, I know, if I kill Tommy, they're going to kill me. So let me figure out a way to do this. And I was trying to figure it out. I was like, how do I get my cake and eat it too? My wife at the time pitched me an idea. She's like, well, what happens to Tommy when he gets pulled out of the van? I go, we don't really see what happens to him because we stay within the van and we hear everything going outside. Like, we don't know what happens to Tommy. She goes, so technically, if you haven't seen him die, he hasn't died. I was like, you're right. He could just get right back in the ambulance because the guy goes out to help him. And maybe that's how he does it. Like, that guy saves his life just in time. And then Jason goes to get him and they can drive away. And so we do that in secret. We film that in like July of 2017, get it all done in the can. I tell everybody, no pictures on set, no telling anybody about this shit. Like, don't let it slide at all. And then Friday the 13th, 2017 comes out. That's the day Friday the 13th, the real film was supposed to come out, the one that was supposed to be directed by Greg Eisner. And people tune in on YouTube, and everything that they know about fan films at that point is that they are basically about as like, they're worth about like as much weight as you can put in a garbage can. Like, they're just not great films.
Right.
They're only fans can watch them and get certain amount of things, but you're not watching a real movie.
Yeah.
Right.
But we were lucky enough to get invited to debut at the Telluride Horror Show. And I had met the people at the Telluride Horror Show playing the Friday the 13th game, oddly enough.
Yeah.
And we got an invite. I sent them the film. They liked it. They thought, oh, this would be great. It's Friday the 13th this year. We open on Friday the 13th. We were going to show Friday the 13th part 1, but we've all seen that movie so many times. Like, we'd like something fresh, and this is something fresh, and we think it's good. And so the combination of it being at Telluride Horror Show gave it a little bit of credit. It put it in front of the eyes of people at, you know, Birth Movies Death and Dread Central and Bloody Disgusting and all these different outlets that, you know, picked it up and ran with it and wrote reviews to it because they were all writing reviews for a movie that were going to Telluride Horror Show. Friday the 13th franchise had picked us up at that time, and was, you know, was really sort of being like, this looks promising. And even Bloody Disgusting had done an article on it saying like, this could be something worth checking out. It's like, this is a little bit more cinematic of a fan film that we've ever seen before from somebody who's like an independent filmmaker, not somebody who had like Ari Shanker, who did Power Rangers and like bad, you know, Dirty Laundry. Like, this was something about who was it, like a first time like filmmaker to a certain degree coming out and having something like this, especially as a fan film, was something that was very odd. So we didn't have like a giant following at first, but we had enough people that we had about 30,000 views in the first night. And
Wow.
Tuning in, people watched the entire movie. And when those doors opened, it changed things. You know what I mean? Like, when Tom shows up at the end of the movie, because people are already sort of impressed with what we've done so far, and they're like, wow, this is actually kind of really good. When Tommy shows up, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me and come up to Tom and they were like, I was in my living room and I was watching this movie. I jumped up on the couch, man. I was screaming. I was like, Tommy, I can't really be like, oh, Tommy, and all that stuff. And so it took the Friday the 13th fandom from a place of, man, this sucks. Like, we haven't had a film since the remake. The film just got thing, and all we got is fucking fan film coming out. Who gives a shit? And all of a sudden, like, whoa, like, this fan film is better than half the movies I've seen in the franchise. And Tom Matthews is in it. And I can't believe it. How did you do it? How did you do it? And like, and so it really just started, like, it woke a lot of people up. And all of a sudden, filmmakers around the country were like, I could do that. A lot of people said, oh, I could do that. And you've now seen what, like 20, 30 Friday the 13th fan films come out in the last 6, I mean, more than that, like probably like somewhere between 40 and 50 of, you know, different ranges. We have, you know, millionaires out here paying for people to make movies for them. We got kids making movies in their backyards. We got, you know, grown adults, like teenagers, all sorts of people just getting together and just celebrating Friday the 13th and telling their own story in their own different way. And it, in ways that brought the fandom together, and in other ways it drove the fandom apart because everyone got super competitive, and, you know, fan films started sabotaging other fan films, and everybody wanted a piece of the pie, and everybody wanted to be the next Never Hike Alone. And it became this like sort of like, it's an odd story. Like, it's just weird the way that it sort of got, and how sort of personal things got with a lot of different things. But for me, what it came down to is that I just wanted to work on a Friday the 13th film.
Yeah, this was a great talk, man. Wow. Learned a lot, for one thing. I appreciate you giving us the time, man. I know we know you're a busy guy and you got a lot coming up, and we're super excited for you, man. We'll always be fans. We'll support. And I just hope everything in the future goes well for you, man. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be an eventful couple of months. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we
It
know
definitely
you'll put in
is.
the work, man. So we're excited for everything you're working on, dude.
Cool.
Yeah, and I have to add that I feel like an idiot for not wearing black and red t-shirt. So with that
You got the
being
black
said,
part.
yeah, I got that, but you know, whatever. I'm not as cool. With that being said, let's say goodbye and good morning, good evening. How's he say it?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.
Good night.
All right, guys.
Peace.